your screen.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. The material that I'm going to be presenting today is from the organization Community Resilience Initiative. You can find them online, and they're the driving force behind the documentary Paper Tigers, which is a documentary based on a school here in the United States in Washington. And it was a last chance school for many children who had been kicked out of past educational organizations and schools. And the main thing what they found is that these adverse childhood experiences that we will start with, that we talked about a couple weeks ago, and how those affected their education. A second film that organization was helping as a driving force was Resilience, the Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. And both of those films you likely can see online, and I encourage them as further viewing. So what I would like to do is just to review the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study for those of you who were not with us a couple weeks ago, because I think this is very foundational to the talk that we're going to be having today about the predictive brain. So in the 1990s, Dr. Rob Anda and Dr. Vincent Folletti, they were putting together a study. Their question was, is there any correlation between adverse childhood experiences that happened early on in childhood before the age of 17, and did those experiences early on affect later health? And what they have found is that they found a direct correlation. In the beginning, in the 90s, here are the questions that they asked. They focused on these 10 areas. They asked about maltreatment and neglect, and then family dysfunction. As you can see from this deck of cards, so to speak, on this slide, these adverse childhood experiences focused on child sexual abuse, physical abuse, mentally ill and depressed or suicidal family members, emotional abuse. If children had witnessed domestic violence against a mother, for example, emotional neglect, physical neglect, the loss of a parent or through death or abandonment, drug addiction, and incarceration of a family member. So these are the 10 original ACEs. Perhaps you have heard people talk about their ACE score and or what their adverse childhood experience score might be. If you have ever heard talk of that, these are typically the 10 ACEs they're talking about. Certainly, there are other things that can cause neglect or adversity in a child's life. Let's look at some of those other areas. As you can see on this slide, there are 4 ACE categories. Adverse childhood experiences would be over here on the left, and those are the ones we just spoke of. And then there's adverse circuitry expression. They found there is a lot of trauma connected with kids that have autism, or kids that have Asperger's or epilepsy or cerebral palsy, things where the brain doesn't, the normal functioning doesn't go as maybe what the world around them is used to going. So there's a direct correlation with the way the brain is interacting to their world and some adversity. If you're not thinking and learning like everyone else, it causes stress in the body, and that changes how we view the world, as we'll learn with the predictive brain in a few moments. And then there's adverse community environments. The adverse community environments would be, for example, did a child grow up hearing a lot of gunshots? Was there a lot of violence in that area? Was there systemic racism? Was there other things that in their community affected how they were how they were perceiving what was happening around them? And then there's adverse cultural exposures. Things like classism and ageism, sexism, racism. Certainly in here, we could also add a new category of catastrophic events like the pandemic. So all of these together affect our health, both mentally and physically. And we'll see how in just a few moments here. ACEs are a very high, the #1 chronic health epidemic. The impact of ACEs can now only be ignored as a matter of conscious choice. Here in the United States, I just did a training for several hundred people on what we did here 2 weeks ago with this group. And I had a nurse who just emailed me and said she had been a pediatric nurse here in America for 40 years and had never heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And when learning about this, she said it makes so much sense as she learned about the things children have had to deal with, and certainly even as adults, and how it affects the way we view the world, whether our brain predicts safety or threat. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So basically, just to kind of wrap up a little bit about the ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences are risk factors for later disease, poor mental health, that risk behaviors. ACEs are extremely highly correlated with substance abuse and addiction. So that, in other words, the higher the ACE score, many times the more likely an individual is to be involved in substance abuse, to make risky choices, and they challenge life potential. So let's look at just one more final slide on this for some statistics. In most studies, as the adverse childhood experiences are asked about, we find that ACEs are prevalent, pervasive, and across all sectors, meaning that it doesn't matter necessarily your social economic status. Now, many times that adds more adversity, but here, even in the original study, it was mostly middle class, mostly white, mostly college educated, and all had insurance. And 62% of that study had at least one of those 10. So at least one of them, those individuals who, again, had insurance, they were not dealing with racism, they were mostly educated, had one. A fourth of them had 3 or more of those that had happened to them as children, and then 5% had 6 or more. We have found that ACEs cluster or co-occur. In other words, many times somebody who's experienced one has often experienced others, perhaps both physical and emotional neglect or abuse. And then finally, there's a dose response that we see. In other words, the higher the score, the higher predictive negative outcomes if unaddressed. So what does that mean? So what I would like to do is ask our tech team if they would launch a poll, our first poll about the 4 categories of ACEs. If possible, they'll be launching the poll. And if you can weigh in and make a selection when you see the poll appear, that would be great. It gives us a little insight into this group, the people that are gathered here today, and hearing a little bit about these adverse childhood experiences. And again, those 4 categories will be listed on the poll. So it's more than just the adverse childhood experiences we talked about last week, the original study, but other things that cause adversity within how an individual is hearing their world. So if possible, if our team would be able to launch the first poll, we'll give it a moment and see if that's something that, oh, perfect, good job, team. So which of the 4 ACE categories presented surprised you the most? If you are able to participate in our poll and make a selection, was it the adverse childhood experiences, those 10 factors, the original 10 factors in the 90s, or thinking about autism and the ways that our circuitry in our brain, the culture exposures, how the world around us affect us, and then adverse community environments. So it looks like there's kind of a surprise across the board. We'll let the poll stay open for another minute or so, so that or another 30 seconds or so. And if you can weigh in on the poll and tell us which of these 4 ACE categories surprised you the most. I'll let that run for just a moment. Thank you all for weighing in. I think that being able to hear how this group how they're hearing and learning would be very important. And then we'll talk about how these ACEs affect our experiences and why and how our brains are predictive. We'll be watching a couple short videos in just a moment as well. All right, we'll give the poll about 10 more seconds. And then I'll let our team end it and you can all see the results. It looks like overall the adverse childhood experiences, the surprise you the most? And again, 2 weeks ago, we spent our entire time talking about that. Today, we just wanted to give an overview so that you can hear how those adverse childhood experiences affect the way our brain begins to predict threat or safety. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll, and I'll move on to our next slide. Thank you very much. We will have time to do some question and answers at the end as well. So we are shaped by our experiences. That's really the most important thing we can take away from these early childhood experiences, or understanding how trauma and adversity affects us. So these early experiences are built into our bodies, and that sets the stage to be for us, in each of us individually, to be prepared for life in a dangerous world or a safe world. Let's look at how this works by watching this short video.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
All right. Let me go on to our next slide. Oops, sorry. All right, here we go. Let me show you how early adversity actually changes the brain architecture and how quickly that sets. Before you, you can see an MRI or a scan of a typical development on the left of a 2-year-old, and on the right, a 2-year-old who's experienced extreme neglect. Now, on the left, you can see that the prefrontal cortex here is the most active. But if you notice on the scan on the right, it's the back part of the lower part of the brain that is more active. The part that helps us control the fight, flight, or freeze, the part that is trying to keep us alive. So the higher the adversity, the more stress that our bodies are under, the more our brain has to spend time keeping us alive and focusing on the world around us being safe, or if the world's a threat, rather than being able to reach this part of our brain where we can think and have choices, where we can do predictions in terms of how we go through life. So in terms of learning. So I say this because if you have children who are living in a very toxic environment where there is a lot of stress, they're not able to develop at the same rate that somebody who has all their needs mostly met and feels safe. So let's look a little bit more about that. The opportunity of change. So as you can see from this slide, the brain's ability to change in response to experiences, the older we get, goes down. Our neural pathways are more set. Excuse me. So those pathways certainly can change. We've seen that many times in stroke victims or other brain injury victims, where parts of our brain can maybe be retrained and things might be able to be, we can adapt in different ways. But that is so much harder than in the early times when our brain is developing. Think about learning a different language. I know that here in the United States, many children don't learn a second language until middle school or high school is when our school system suggests that trying. But it is so much harder then versus when a child is young. The amount of effort increases. So what is predictive brain theory? This processing theory. There is much over for many centuries, really, the triune brain, where we thought, the brain worked in very succinct ways. You know, there's the different realms of the brain, the emotions and the thinking, and the part that controls our body. But the predicting brain, this whole idea of our brain, how it works together to predict the world around us, is a newer discovery or science. And I have a video that I'd like to share that I think really illustrates this well. There's no sound as this video first starts.
When you see this pounding and clapping, your brain is filling in the gaps. There's no sound here. And if you're a fan of the rock group Queen, your brain might even start predicting this filling in of gaps is prediction, and it's how your brain works all the time. Have a look at this. Right now, your brain is working like crazy, searching through a lifetime of experience, making thousands of guesses at once, weighing the probabilities to try and figure out what this is most like. Not what is this, but what is this most like from your past experience? If you still see black and white blobs, then you are in a state that scientists call experiential blindness. Want to be cured of your blindness? So now, many of you see food on a table. Cherries at the bottom, lemons and oranges at the top and to the right, lettuce on the left, and a little bit of ginger peeking out from the bottom left. Why do you see these black and white blobs differently than you did a moment ago? What you see is a combination of what is on the screen and what is in your head. Your brain is doing something really remarkable. It's changing the firing of its own neurons. So you experience cherries and lemons and lettuce when all that's there is a bunch of blobs. So believe it or not, this is not a trick. This is a special example that we built to reveal to you how your brain actually works under the hood. Every waking moment of your life, your brain is using past experiences to predict and create your current experiences. Prediction is why some people see a dress that's black and blue, while others see a dress that's gold and white. It all depends on whether your brain is predicting that you're seeing the dress in the morning or in the evening. Your predicting brain is why you daydream. It's how you imagine all the ways you might save the day. Or win an argument you've yet to have with someone. In every waking moment, your brain is doing its best to guess what will happen next. If your brain didn't predict, then sports couldn't exist. A soccer ball can be kicked faster than 100 kilometers per hour, but our eyes have a delay up to 190 milliseconds or even longer. In the space of that delay, the ball has moved 5.3 meters. Think of how much faster a baseball or a hockey puck goes. Many predictions are at a micro level. Your predicting brain is guessing how much water and salt and glucose your body needs to stay alive and healthy, predicting the meaning of bits of light. It's guessing whether the rustling in the grass is a wild animal or just the wind. Every time you hear speech, like right now, your brain breaks up the continuous stream of sounds into phonemes, syllables, words, and ideas, all by using prediction. Other predictions are at the macro level. You're interacting with a friend, and based on context, your brain predicts that the two of you will smile at each other. So, you smile first in anticipation of her smile. Your movement then causes her brain to issue new predictions and guide new actions, back and forth in a dance of prediction and movement. Predictions are automatic, effortless, and you have no sense that you're doing them. Yet they make sense of the world in a quick and efficient way. Without them, we'd be deaf and blind. For many years, scientists believed that your neurons spend most of their time asleep and wake up only when stimulated by something in the world. Now we know that all your neurons are firing constantly, nudging one another at various rates. This is called intrinsic brain activity, and it's one of the great discoveries of modern neuroscience. Even more compelling is that this intrinsic brain activity represents millions of predictions of what you will experience next based on all the experience of your past. These predictions all combine into a simulation of the outside world. Prediction turns shapes and sounds into trees and grass and runners. Your brain predicts a honk is from a car, or a honk is from a goose. There's no sound here. What you're experiencing is a consequence of your brain simulating the world. Scientists sometimes call this perceptual inference. Because these predictions are filling in gaps of information that are missing. In fact, seeing something can cause your brain to predict what it will taste like. What it will smell like. What it will feel like. Your brain is predicting all the time, effortlessly, automatically, because predictions are more efficient than reactions. Combining past experiences to create your simulations of the world. And these simulations are the basis for all your experiences and all your actions. This is your predicting brain in action. So, why is it important that you understand that your brain is predicting instead of reacting? The answer is pretty simple. If if you understand how something works, you'll be able to go in and tinker with it. Prediction is the key ingredient that your brain is using to process two other ingredients that are necessary for your brain to make motions.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about how our brains predict threat and safety. We're going to focus first on the threat part. So as our brains, as we're going about our daily lives, as you're at work today or wherever you're at, when you go home this evening, that sensory input, your brain from your sights, your sounds, your smells, everything around you, your brain makes some statistical predictions. Perhaps you are walking and you see big clouds and your brain is thinking, hey, it might rain here. I need to do something about that, or I need to walk faster. You're driving home and, traffic lights, your brain is predicting when you should stop or go, or if that pedestrian is going to be walking in front of you. Your brain is constantly making those predictions. But sometimes your brain will make predictions that get you kind of unbalanced, that interoception, where what we are sensing, seeing, feeling, thinking isn't what are the same thing. It's not synced with our brain, right? It's what we may hear something, but it doesn't go with what we thought was going to be happening. And sometimes this will cause a fight, flight, or freeze in us. That begins then to take all the energy in our body, our adrenaline, our cortisol, and put it to different body systems that need us, like that fight, flight, or freeze. Now, sometimes this can be in error. Let me explain an example from my own life to share what I mean. Right before the pandemic started, I was walking out onto our front porch and I had a big box of trash in my hand, and it was dark. Now I live in the desert here in Arizona. There is definitely houses around us, but there was a little bit more open ground. And when I was stepping onto my porch, I felt like I had my flip-flops, my sandals on. And as I walked onto the porch, I felt something squishy under my foot. And my brain immediately thought, that's weird. I don't have a hose on my front porch. And in that next split second, I heard a rattle. It was a rattlesnake. I had stepped on a rattlesnake. Here in the desert, we have a lot of rattlesnakes. And as I stepped and I heard or felt that squish, thinking it was a hose, wondering that unbalanced interoception, heard the rattle, my brain immediately went into fight, flight, or freeze, and I leapt forward. Fortunately, because it was winter and it was kind of late for a snake to be out, the snake was laid in such a way that it wasn't coiled and it didn't strike. So after my, of course, panic attack and my heart beating and racing, my body was doing what it was designed to do. There was a threat prediction, and all those systems in my body were working to get me out of danger. Now, if you fast forwarded about 2 months, it was, again, still during the pandemic, and I was walking into our garage this time where we would park our car. And as the door shut behind me, I again hadn't turned on the light just yet. I was doing that all in a fluid motion. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw something and again heard a rattle. Now, this time the snake was coiled. And I want to show you a picture of that snake. There you go. So this is a picture of that snake. This was a rattlesnake that was in our garage, and it was coiled at my foot. I began screaming, of course, because that was my body when it predicted this threat. And we ended up having to call someone to get it. I'm here. The snakes are very territorial, and because it was in our garage, we were just not able to relocate it, and we needed to take care of it. And I'm sorry about the snake that was in our garage, but as you can see, it was a rather large rattlesnake. Now, let me tell you how this happens more with the brain. About 3 weeks after this second snake, we were in our outside, and my children said, rattlesnake. And I thought, oh my gosh. So we ran outside, and it was just a little tiny rattlesnake this time. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know what is going on. And in that very moment, our sprinklers in our backyard came on. Now, the sound of our sprinklers when they came in, when they come on, makes a sound. And I screamed and leapt like almost out of my shoes. And my whole family turned to me and they said, "Why are you screaming? It's a little baby snake." And it was just the sprinklers. But you see, my brain had begun to predict threat. Because there had been so many snakes in such a short time, my brain was on high alert, predicting this threat. So when the sensory stuff, let me go back to this slide. I'm sorry, let me go, there we go. The threat predictions. When my brain, the sensory input that was coming in from my brain and heard that sound, it put together all those past things that had been happening. And statistically, it thought there is a really big snake here. And so that unbalanced interoception, what my brain was hearing, all the senses coming in, that fight, flight, or freeze, where I screamed and, my heart rate went up, my pulse and my breathing, my blood pressure, sorry, that's what I was trying to say. All that prediction, it was a prediction error. It wasn't a snake. At that point, it was simply the sprinklers. So that is how threat predictions can work. So let's look at how safety predictions work. The same thing, my brain takes that sensory, what's coming in. I make statistical predictions on what's going on around me. And if I have generally had a childhood that allows me to be able to feel that the world is generally safe and people are generally kind, and in general, people aren't out to get me, then my brain is going to, in general, predict things that are safer. And it's going to cause this connection to happen. And that's going to give me the sense that all is well in my world. Now, let me show you a picture that shows kind of this safety, and then we'll get ready to take another poll. So here you can see this happens to be my daughter and my grandson, one of my daughters and my grandson. She is smiling at him. He is smiling at her, which makes her smile back. Remember that serve and return from the first video, that safety prediction, that cycle. He feels safe. She makes him feel more safe. He makes her feel safe. And it's a cycle that goes on. Now, for many of us, based on how we're raised, is whether we in general look at the world with a threat prediction or a safety prediction. So let's ask a second poll. We'll have our tech crew launch the second poll about threat versus safety predictions, because we'll talk a little bit more about how, in general, these adverse childhood experiences and the way that we are raised and the world around us, think about even the pandemic, all of the ways that we feel threatened. And this will help bring up this question. So which arena of your life do you think will most benefit from understanding how the brain predicts threat or safety, and how that prediction then changes how we or someone else responds or reacts? Does this change? The more you are going to be learning about this, do you think this is going to have a higher impact on your work, on your family, on yourself, when you start to think about threat versus safety? And I'll share one more story in just a moment after our poll, so that you can see even more how this affects our day-to-day work. So we'll take just another minute or two for the poll to play. So thank you all. Give it another few minutes. If you have any questions, if you put them into the question and answer, we'll have some time at the end to go over some question and answers. And certainly our tech crew might be answering some of those as we go along. All right, let's give the poll about 10 more seconds. So I find this very interesting with the group that is here with us today. About 100 people have weighed in, and it's pretty split between how safety or threat these predictions are going to affect more, or the information more on yourself, which is huge. And we'll talk about that, because if you can figure that out for yourself, it will affect your work and your family. And many people also can see that that's going to affect their family and their work. So we'll go ahead and end our poll right now. Thank you so much, tech team. You guys are awesome and able to answer or put all this up so much has been very helpful. So let me tell you one more brief story as we talk about this. I'll go, I'll leave this slide on. So when we talk about threat or safety, when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, it's the resilience score that counts. So our adverse childhood experience score might be higher, but if we have support and relationships that are calm and safe and trusting, that is going to be more helpful for healing and for going through life than if we have a low score, but we don't have any, any support. So let me talk about how this threat and safety plays out in our own lives. As my friend Rose said, if you were here during the introduction, she said, in addition to our 4 biological children, we have 1 adopted child. We adopted her when she was a teenager, and she had been in our foster care system here in the US for about 3.5 years. During that 3.5 years, she had been moved about 26 times to different locations, or it had disruptions where she was in a group home or something had happened and the crisis team had to come in and be called. So all of these things in my daughter's life, all of the things during her time in foster care and during her time in her biological family that caused her to go into foster care, allowed her brain to begin to build these pathways that said, in general, the world is unsafe. In general, people are out to get me. In general, I can't trust those around me. These threat predictions. How does that play out in her everyday life? Well, when we got ready to start school last year, the year before the pandemic, she said we were getting ready to have our parent-teacher conferences. That's what we do here when with the teachers meet with the parents to talk about the progress of a student. As we got ready to go to that meeting, she said, I don't want to go because everybody always cries. Now, in my experience with my biological children, nobody ever cried at conferences. To me, conferences were generally safe. Usually the teachers were encouraging and kind, and my children felt built up and supported. But that had not been my daughter's experience. So when we came into the conference room, she was already predicting threat. She was already on high alert. She was already dysregulated and not feeling very comfortable. Her brain was predicting threat. When we were in the room, one of her teachers was talking about some assignments that she had not been turning in. And my daughter said, well, I didn't understand how to do them. To which the teacher said, well, you could stay after school. And I explained that we were doing some sports activities to try to help her get some new friendships because this was a new school. And the teacher said, rightly so, you can come in the morning. I'm here early. Now, again, remember, my daughter is predicting threat. My daughter is already on high alert. Her blood pressure is up, her heart rate is up, and she folded her arms and said, I'm not coming in that early. Now, what that did was trigger in the teacher a threat prediction. Oh, this is a student who's defiant and who doesn't care. As her mom, I knew that what was triggering this was her fear and her shame that she had missed so much schooling and she was having a hard time learning. But the teacher read that prediction as defiance. And so the teacher said, well, if you're not coming in, I guess we're done here. And everybody finished the meeting. So see, my daughter's threat prediction affected the entire room. The more we understand about trauma and the more we understand about how adversity affects the way we view the world, both ourselves and those around us, the more we can regulate and be safe, safe havens and safe relationships so that we can help somebody predict and experience safety. I do see that several people have raised their hands, and we do have some question time at the end. So if you don't mind maybe jotting down your question or holding the question, we'll cover that at the end. So let's talk more about what is resilience. How do I build resilience in my daughter? How do you build resilience in somebody who has gone through a lot of adversity and who predicts threat? So here, let's talk about this. The rewiring of your threat predictions to safety predictions. Resilience is the capacity to develop skills and capabilities to adapt to adversity. A developmental process over the lifespan that can be modeled, taught, and promoted. Now, there's several things that help us build resilience. So resilience is that ability to find hope and to be able to predict safety and to be able to bounce back. So protective factors that assist us in rewiring our brain's threat to safety rewiring. These protective factors can help buffer the effects of trauma. Positive childhood experiences are among the protective factors that can help. Now, the number one positive protective factor, let's look at it. The number one is relationships. The number and quality of relationships in a child's life builds trust, confidence, a sense of security, reconnecting to love through strong social network that surrounds and supports. You see, when we feel that there's somebody for us, when we feel that there is somebody who is behind us, who is an anchor that kind of holds us steady in a storm, when we feel that there's somebody who is a safe place, not just because they tell us they're safe, but because we feel safe in their presence, that's the number one thing that can help us to rewire our brains to predict safety versus threat in our daughter's life. As we have been able to watch her for the last 3 years and raise her, what I can say is that she is learning more and more to predict safety over threat. It takes a very long time for those neurons to be rewired, but it is so worth it. We just have to understand how that works and how we can build that safety. So in my daughter's case, when she does something wrong or she acts out or she says, I'm not doing that and you can't make me, and then when I can respond in a calm way, then it helps to say, hey, I might have had to have a consequence, but I didn't threaten and there was no violence, there was no abuse. So there was a consequence, but it was in a safe situation. If you are dealing with a patient in a hospital or in a doctor's office and you come in and that patient already maybe is afraid of doctors, has had bad experiences, or is the unknown. If they're already predicting threat and you respond in such a way as it engages more threat, they're not going to be able to really access this thinking part of their brain. They're going to be on the defensive, or they're going to think, this doctor doesn't know anything. In fact, I took my daughter to her doctor yesterday. And because this doctor has been with her for a long time, but this doctor trying to build a relationship, but usually ends up just trying to tell her some things. Hey, you need to lose more weight. You need to exercise more. You need to drink soda less. You need to get more sleep. All of those things are true, but my daughter feels more threatened in the way the doctor says it, because the doctor doesn't spend any time saying, gosh, good job. You have lost 25 pounds in a pandemic. That has been something my daughter's worked very hard at. She really struggles with some food issues. Instead, she usually focuses on how she can better lose weight. So what that does is tell my daughter that, things aren't good enough. And in that quickly triggers back to that threat prediction versus safety prediction. So let's look at some beneath behavior. The body, our brain has a lot of different networks, right? There's the safety network and the communication network, the networks that keep us alive, and the neurological networks that keep our body, living, breathing, and all of those pieces come together. I do see that several people, and I think Rose is on with me, have questions. Rose, if you want me to stop to answer any questions, let me know, but if not, we'll just save them for the end. So I just want to let everybody know that we will save them till the end, and I will let Rose, if there's something she wants to interrupt, that she will do that.
Thank you, Lottie. I think
okay.
we can wait to finish the presentation, then we have the question and answer session at the end, as we always do.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure, since I was seeing several hands being raised. All right, so let's talk about why are brain networks important to behavior. Behavior is a downstream effect of the need communicated from whatever's happening in the in the upstream of the brain. In other words, when we see a behavior, we always can stop and think, what is the need that is driving that behavior? Does the person in front of me or myself, do I feel unconnected? Do I feel unsafe? For example, if my stomach is growling right now, the need is that I need some food. If my mouth is very dry and I'm having a hard time talking or swallowing, the need is that I need some water. If I'm falling asleep at my desk at work, the need is that I need some rest. But what about when I'm acting out somewhere? If I'm being very defensive or defiant, what is the need there? Well, the need might be that I need to feel connected, or I need to have a little bit more control. So why are brain networks important to behavior? To understand and identify the need of each brain network and how that need is expressed as behavior, it's important to do that, because when we understand what the need is, we can meet the need, and that will solve the problem or come closer to solving the problem. We want to evaluate our own needs first and then address the needs of the other. I can't help you meet your needs if my needs aren't met. If I'm tired or hungry, or if I'm frustrated or angry or disconnected, I have to do that. Self-care is so important. During the pandemic, it is especially hard because many of us, especially in the profession that many of you are working in, you don't have any time for self-care. And I understand that. But the reality is that the less time you spend in self-care, the less of your best self you have to bring to your patients or to your clients or to your family. And when we understand the need driving the behavior, we can choose appropriate strategy and skill sets to address the need from positive intent and not judgment, which keeps people around us out of the threat prediction. Let's look at some of these networks. So we have safety networks. Your brain's primary job is to keep you safe. So that's why when you feel unsafe, you often will go into fight or flight or freeze or any of those other responses. So you might see a patient or a child or a friend or a spouse hit or push or scream or bite. They might withdraw or run away or hide, or they might just surrender. Sometimes in abusive situations, that the brain is trying to keep someone safe, so they just acquiesce everything and just in hopes of keeping safety, to not rock the boat, so to speak. So our body's alarm and arousal system is at work to try to keep us safe. Then we have connection networks. And then we're going to get ready for another poll. I'll let our team know after this slide. So connection networks ask, am I connected? Sometimes the behavior we see in those around us is attention seeking. People feel disconnected. In the world today, think of perhaps social media, how many people, the things they might post on social media because they feel disconnected. Think about everything from politics to the pandemic to other worldwide events. People feel disconnected. And so sometimes they just need to feel more connected, and their response isn't always the best response, but it's the need driving the behavior. So let's ask this. Take a moment to think about what you can do that personally increases this is not a poll, this is just a thought question. So take a moment to think about what you can do that personally increases your sense of safety. So when you are feeling unsafe around you, what is it that you can do personally so that you can feel more safe? Because if you are feeling more safe, you are going to respond in a different way. You see, prediction drives behavior. The threat arousal system activates this prediction pattern. So understanding that cycle helps us explain the behavior we see as communication and not malintent. In other words, if a patient or somebody in front of us is being very aggressive, if we can stop and ask, what is it that their brain is predicting might happen now? What is this need driving the behavior we're seeing? If you can stop and be curious rather than furious and think, maybe they're not out to get me. This isn't malintent. Their behavior is communicating something. What is that something? You see, the behavior we see is only the top of the iceberg, or the tip of the iceberg. The unseen root down here, this is often caused by adverse childhood experiences, the thing that drives the behavior. If we can be curious as to what I'm seeing, if we can ask the question, I wonder what this person has been through. Think of the pandemic again. Many of us are living on this edge of life that we haven't had to live on before, wondering what's going to happen next. Is the world going to shut down again? And being very frustrated and all of that, and worried and all of that, and anxious, and that affects our behavior. So if we can be inwardly curious as well and think, what are my rules and beliefs and values affect what I think should be? Those are very important for us to be able to ask, because as we relate with others, it in turn responds how they relate to us, and how they relate to us and responds how we relate to them. You see, the whole idea of a window of stress tolerance, there's baseline levels. A healthy child's baseline of stress, even in adults, the breaking point is much higher. They can handle a lot of things. But if there has been a lot of trauma, this little space can trigger pretty quickly. In my daughter, as I said, food is a huge trigger, and it is for many people who've been through adversity, or some of the other, for her, if somebody has an angry face or somebody uses a sharp word, she's very quick to flip. Now, if you were to use a sharp word with me, or be very frustrated with me, I am likely going to go, did I do something to offend you? Can you tell me what's going on? Because I have more tolerance in there, because I haven't lived in this whole threat prediction. So let's talk about some ways that we can help move through this. All right. First of all, if we can learn to not judge what we don't know. So if we can, instead of responding in fear, we can respond in love. Or if we can know that this person might be responding in fear to us. So how does this work? An individual needs to experience love, trust, and safety to thrive. Across the board, every person needs to experience love, trust, and safety in order to thrive. But some things happen to us that are less than nurturing. It might be abuse. It might be the pandemic. It might be, racism. It might be something, but whatever that is, that now we're feeling like, ooh, I don't feel very loved, trusted, and I don't feel safe. So this produces fear in us. Now that fear often is even a fear of loss of control. Think again about the pandemic. We all are kind of losing that, like, what does this world look like? I can't control how safe I feel. I can't control whether I wear a mask or go outside during certain levels of government, declaration, whatever they're saying. So when I fear a fear of loss of control, I have this defensive behavior. Right? I'm going to be more on edge. I might be more rude. I might be more angry. I might be more short or frustrated. And then that makes more offensive behavior. So not only am I feeling more things, now I'm kind of acting out and I'm yelling at you more. So the one thing I might be like, hey, I don't want to talk to you. And the next thing I'm like, you know what? You better back up. And that creates that cycle. Now, sometimes this triggered trait, if a person lives with threat prediction for a long period of time, it can turn from a state into a trait, so that I live that way many times. In other words, these people, somebody who has experienced a lot of adversity might go around in general saying, hey, I feel very unsafe, and they live differently. They choose differently. And that's why this is so important for us to understand. So I want you to think just a minute. We won't do a few minutes, but I want you to reflect on what we've discussed and think about how love, trust, and safety are vital for us to be healthy and to respond in healthy ways. I'm going to give you some tools for how we can respond. This idea of roles, and we'll talk about what each of those letters stand for. The shift to a trauma-informed practice. How do we understand how trauma affects those around us, and how can we be informed in our response? First of all, that if I can be careful how I react and respond differently, that really changes the interaction and the safety of those around me. The more effective way of responding to a triggered individual is for me to kind of pause and go, I wonder what's happening. So let's break this down a little bit. We need to recognize our own emotional constructs and prediction concept. In other words, do you personally, in general, predict threat or safety? If you are somebody who predicts threat a lot, you have to be aware of that, because that will then come out to the other person. And we need to recognize, in that case, we need to recognize that it starts with us. Remember that our mirror neurons were shaped by our caregiver's behavior, and our behavior actually shapes and mirrors others. If I come up to you and I smile and I exude this warmth, you are more likely to predict safety than threat. If I come up to you and I have a very angry face and my brow is furrowed, even if it's not about you, your brain is more likely to predict threat. Self-awareness is the first step. So that means if we think about our family of origin, that has a strong imprinting on us. It changes how we affect others. We need to recognize our own state. In other words, am I feeling very safe right now? Am I feeling threatened right now? It's going to affect how I interact with you. And we need to learn to identify that. If I'm thinking, I don't feel very safe right now, or I'm not feeling very at ease right now, I'm going to respond. I'm not going to be a good listener. I'm not going to be a good helper. I'm not going to be able to assist you when I'm not feeling very safe. If you were here, I believe that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about from the Marvel comics, the whole idea of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. So our first effort, when the Hulk is triggered, when that fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain, when we are activated and saying, hey, I don't feel very safe right now, and that person or that person is not feeling very safe, and the Hulk is in the room, as we remember, if from any of the movies or any of the comics, it takes a little while for the Hulk to calm down, for the adrenaline and the cortisol to get out of his body. So we have to wait for Bruce Banner to be back in the room in order to actually get to the thinking part, to teaching any lessons, to giving any health education. But whatever we can do to get Bruce Banner in the room quicker is important by helping to establish safety. So we need to learn to read our own sensations first. When do you feel different? What happens when you begin to feel that anxiety? So when you, especially in this pandemic, that self-care, when you realize that you are being more impatient, when you are struggling more, when you are not being the listener you want to be, when you are not able to be fully present, how does that look like in you, and how do you restore that balance? And we're going to do a survey later on in just a few minutes on some self kind of what triggers you, and then later on some ways that we can take care of ourselves. So we need to learn to move from threat to safety by developing a conscious awareness of our state of mind. That might be taking some deep breaths, just taking 4 or 5 deep breaths so that we are a little calmer, that our heart rate's a little lower, that our pulse or our blood pressure goes down. The more we develop that awareness, the easier it can become for us to manage our networks. What's the need driving our behavior? And are we feeling safe and connected? It's not only okay to take care of ourselves, it's mandatory. If you aren't taking good self-care, you cannot be there for someone else. When we are working with somebody, we need to remember the example we use here is Q-tip, quit taking it personally. When somebody responds in threat to me, if I can remember that likely there is some need driving that behavior, then I can respond a little different. So now we're going to do our triggered poll. This is a poll that we'll launch that talks about a little self-awareness. What are the things that trigger you? In other words, what are the things that activate you into your threat response? What are the things that might come up that you can check on this poll? And I think it allows you only maybe to check one. Many of these might be, you're like, oh, many of those things trigger me, but choose one that triggers you the most, something that puts you where you don't feel safe anymore, and how that responds different. So if our tech team would launch that poll, that would be great. So we'll talk about what are your triggers, because the more aware we are of the things that trigger us to feel threat rather than safety, the healthier we can be, because we can take care of that need driving that behavior, and the better we can respond with others. So if we're able to launch that poll, that would be great. And this is poll number 3, I believe. Perfect. There we go. We'll leave this up for about a minute. So which of these things trigger you in your threat response and cause you to be dysregulated, kind of, just all over the place or no longer calm? So if you can go ahead and weigh in, I find it very interesting to think that not all of us are triggered by the same way. So if you wouldn't mind clicking one of those, thank you, as people are weighing in. You can scroll down because there's a couple more: being bossed or bullied, if you didn't scroll down all of those to see. We'll let everybody, we're going to give it about 30 more seconds. So if you get a chance to weigh in, that would be great. So far, some of our winning, the yelling, cussing, and harsh language seems to be in the forefront of something that triggers people, as well as being bossed or bullied. Oh, and expectations. That is a trigger for me for sure. So if you're able to, we'll give it about 10 or 15 more seconds. If you can weigh in on our poll. Remember, it's helpful if you understand what triggers you, what tells your brain to get into the threat prediction. What is it around you that does that? And you can begin to acknowledge that. It goes a long way to trying to change that to predict safety or to acknowledge that. All right, so it looks like overall disrespect, yelling, harsh language, being taken for granted, being bossed or bullied, and then several ones where I think people maybe were able to fill in the blank. All right, we're going to go ahead and close our poll. Thank you all for weighing in. As you can see, that what triggers you and what triggers me is not the same. So it's important to know that we have to be, we just need to be aware that somebody else can be triggered with something that doesn't bother us. So when we feel, well, first of all, it's about how we respond. And then we have to observe, what is it we are observing in the other person? What are those external behaviors that reflect the predictions? A lot of times this threat response predicts patterns of behavior. In other words, somebody might just get very angry, kind of raging, and then they react, and then now they feel bad. Maybe you're like that. As a parent, that happens to me. As a pastor, that happened to me. I wouldn't say rage, but certainly times where I would be frustrated, and then I would be reactive. I wouldn't be very patient, and then I would feel bad that I didn't respond with the love and care that I wanted to respond. So in the roles, the next thing is to label. If we are working with somebody, if we can help a child or adult around us label the things we're observing, here's how that looks like. We can become a video camera to the other person. And it helps to remove that frustration and being misunderstood. I can say something like, it looks like maybe you're feeling very stressed. Is that correct? Or I see your eyes wandering. Or raising, rolling your eyes. You look like you might be frustrated. And I can try to ask that question. Help me understand what you're feeling right now. Because if I can label that, then I can choose to respond different, that elect. The label creates the platform for electing positive intent. It has been said that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge others by their actions. In other words, if somebody is yelling at me, I might just assume they're very angry, but I might just say, gosh, I hear that your voice is raised. Are you frustrated at me? Or are you frustrated at something? I can ask for clarification. And it might just be that they're not so much frustrated at you, but that they've been waiting in a room for a long time and they need to be seen, or they're very hungry and they just needed some food. So when we can clarify, we can help meet the need driving the behavior. We can elect to decide, is this drama or is this trauma? We can be able to understand the language of the behavior we're seeing. So this is really important as we're working with individuals. You might be able to be like, sounds like they're just very frustrated and I don't get as triggered by that if I can give them a different intent than that this person is out to get me. And then we can help solve the problem and have a win-win solution. Because if I can help this individual feel safe, if I can provide connection, and if I can ensure the individual is ready and able to learn, remember, if they are no longer in the Hulk mode, but if I can get them back into Bruce Banner, then we can help solve something that works for both of us. All right. Another part of solving, and then we'll review this part, is the stress behavior is a psychological response to threat. We can reframe the behavior. Why is this person yelling or cussing or being angry? Or why am I yelling or cussing or being angry? If I can think, what is it that's going on in my brain and my body that's causing me to act this way? We can identify the patterns and the stressors, and then we can help reduce that stress and respond with calming practices. Because it's not always about us, but it really is about us if we can bring calmness to the situation. So let's review that. So our roles, we can recognize what we're seeing in ourselves as well. We can observe what we're seeing as we recognize the prevalence of threat or safety. Then we can observe it in ourselves. Are we feeling safe? Is the other person feeling safe? We can label what we see. Are you feeling frustrated or angry? How can I help? We can elect to say, hey, instead of judging or assuming you're out to get me, I can say, it seems like maybe we need to do something to assist with that, to help you feel safe, and that we can help solve it. And this takes practice. So now I want to ask our final poll, if we can, is a poll about self-care. What do we do to take care of yourself so that you can play this role for others? So we're going to launch that poll. And while we're getting ready to do this, I'm going to put this slide back up. And then our last poll that will wrap up, I'm going to put an additional resources up, and then we'll do our question and answers. So we need to know our roles, and go ahead and launch the poll whenever you're ready about self-care. We need to recognize what's going on in our body and in the persons that we're interacting with, be able to observe that. And is this a threat prediction? And what might be producing that, and label what we're seeing and elect positive intent that this person has some needs that we can help met, and then help them solve it. So when our team is ready to launch our final poll, that would be great. And this is a poll about self-care. What do we do to take care of ourselves so that we can bring our best self to those around us? I'd like to give a big thank you to our behind the scenes tech team, who have been doing a great job launching all our polls and making sure everything's going well. So we'll launch our last poll, and then I will put up a resource slide. There you go. When it comes to self-care, what do you do to help stay regulated, healthy, and bring the best version of yourself to those around you? I just named some ideas for self-care. Exercise, walks, eating well, a quiet time, rest, breathing, yoga, meditate, spend time in nature, time with friends and family, getting away, media, screen time. Remember, if we take care of ourselves, then we're more likely to be able to respond with safety to those around us. And when we can do that, it keeps them from predicting threat, and we will have a much more civil interaction. We'll be able to help solve whatever the problem is. They'll be able to learn. They'll take better care of their bodies. We'll have better relationships. All of those things are crucial. And self-care is especially important in the pandemic, right? Because all of us are tapped to the end of our resources. We have to fill that tank. So let's see, exercise and walking, quiet times and rest, meditate and prayer. Those are our winning ones so far. Spending time with friends and family. We'll give it about another 10 seconds. I was in a seminar once, and they were talking about media and whether that is a way for us to numb or whether it's really self-care. And no one knows but you. But the next time that you're doing any of these, think about, is this how I'm numbing, or is this really replenishing my energy? Thank you, all of you who weighed in. It looks like overall, let's see, we're going to end the poll, and let's see the results. The overarching one, it looks like it is the exercise, very close with quiet times and rest, and spending time with family and friends. All right, well, thank you for that part. I'm going to go on to our next 2 slides. We're not going to watch this slide, sorry, but I will tell you, I'm going to leave this up for a minute. If you want to see this, you can Google it. It's a rubber arm experiment, and it's magic or illusion, but it talks about how our brain predicts what's going to happen. That's really how illusions happen. There's really, that magic isn't there. It's really about the science of how our brain predicts. But here's some additional resources on this link. So my friend Rose, I'm going to leave this up for a minute so people can either screenshot that or see it, but this is some of the videos. Some of these are videos we saw today and some are not, but you can look at that, and then I'll go ahead and start responding to question and answers. People are asking about sharing the slides. Let's see, in just a moment, I think I can share a PDF of this in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'll leave the screen up for just a moment, and then I believe I can put a PDF version of this in the chat that people would be able to grab. But I'm going to go ahead and I'll give it another couple seconds. Rose, if you want to help me maybe read any questions. Look like many of the questions that came up were directly about getting tokens for the experience. But is there any questions that individuals have for what we talked about today?
Thank you very much, Robin. That was an excellent presentation, and I believe most of us have followed well. You are well and calm, and I think we have followed well. So we don't have a specific question for this particular presentation, as I can see. Sorry. I encourage people to write their questions in the question and answer chat. Meanwhile, there are several people who lifted up their hands. So if you did want to ask your question, you could still go ahead and ask. Otherwise, unless the hands were lifted by mistake. I can see 6 participants raised their hands, and probably I can check who. Yes.
Okay, and in the meantime, I'm trying to see if I can add the PDF of that. So go ahead if somebody has a question.
Seeing the KNH host is lifting the hand and 4 attendees are lifting their hands. In case, if you're lifting your hands, I can't see exactly who has lifted. You can go ahead and ask the question if there is any, unless the hand was lifted by mistake. That's what I'm assuming. Meanwhile, concerning the tokens for Eric and Royce, those who have asked for the tokens, Rose Joroge, myself, the coordinator for the CPD tokens for the nurses. And we started giving the tokens this last month, July. So for all the time, the last months or the last year, we had not started giving the tokens from KNH because by then it was not accredited by NCK. However, we started last month, and going forward, we're going to continue giving those who attend 30 minutes and up to the end of the presentation, every webinar. So for those who have been really wondering, that's it. And for those who have attended last month, I know you received the tokens. However, you need to note this, the token for nurses, they are given immediately after the presentation. After this webinar, I will send you in your emails. Then you have only 48 hours, sorry, for which you claim your CPD point from the NCK online service portal. And after 48 hours, it expires. So that is communicated into individual emails. If you don't receive your email, I will set the email we are using here so that you can communicate with us there. I hope that is clear for the CPD points for the nurses. The rest of the participants, they always receive their points. Okay, let me check if there is a question about the presentation and the slides. The KNH Research Department always post the recordings of this presentation in our KNH Research website. You can go there and have a repeat of the same. And as well, it has been posted to this webinar in the question and answer chat. Any other question? I can only see Fanny, you're saying wonderful presentation. Can I get the slides? I have said you can. Please requesting for the slides. Yes, you will. Thanks for the presentation. Good.
And I did, Rose, I did put the presentation PDF in the chat. Sometimes people have a hard time downloading that, but it is in there. And then I have also put my email. If somebody wants the PDF of the presentation, they can email me directly if they cannot grab it from the chat. And of course, you have the recording available.
Yes. Thanks for the presentation. It was helpful. I'm just reading the chats. I don't see questions. Just people appreciating. Kindly send us the presentation. Yes, it will be sent. Nice. All right. In case you are lifting your hand and you want to ask a question verbally, you go ahead and mute and ask. 2 people are lifting their hands.
Yeah, I don't know if they have that option because we're in a webinar, but I can say many of the questions were about the points that you addressed. And then also the questions were about getting the presentation. So if you are still on with us, again, I did put the PDF inside the chat feature, as well as my email. And that information, then you can get the PDF that way. It looks like most of the Q&A and the Q&A is on either or comments or about receiving the slides.
Yes, and somebody is asking what about the pharmacy, whom can we reach for CPD? I think the pharmacy people also have their coordinator, but you can as well talk to the research department here in KNH. They'll be able to let you know how you get your, or I think I could invite somebody from the research department to respond to that, please. Over to you. Somebody from the.
Oh, for the other department. Okay.
Yes. Great presentation. Thank you. Powerful presentation, great presentation. Thank you. Yes, go ahead and. All right, from our side, I think we have come to the end of this presentation today, and we want to thank everyone who made it today and being there to the end. For the nurses who are in the house on board today, you will receive your CPD point. I did request for the token to be sent yesterday. So there is the Robin's email address.
Thank you all for joining us today. I very much appreciate your time. I know it is very valuable, and I hope that you found something that's valuable in your work and or personal life today.
So we want to thank you very much, Robin Brumendo. You've done a great job this time and the other time, and we look forward to seeing you again.
All right.
When you have, yes. When we invite you for yet more. Thank you. We really appreciate.
Thank you for having me. Yes. And thank you very much as well to our team who did a great job with our poll questions and recording and setting everything up. It is a very great service, and they all did a great job. It takes a lot of people putting together this work, and what you do matters. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.